I was standing by the casket when my daughter leaned close and whispered, "Dad, can you lend me some money for the funeral?" Her voice was soft, but the words cracked through me like a rifle shot in church. The lilies at my wife's feet were still fresh, their perfume heavy in the small chapel, and there she was asking me for cash while her mother's body lay in front of us. I didn't answer. My hand trembled against the polished oak edge of the coffin. For a moment I thought I had misheard, but her eyes told me otherwise. She meant it. She wanted money right there in the house of mourning before the ground had even taken my wife back. I had been married to my wife, Elaine, for 42 years. We built our life in a small Midwestern town, the kind of place where men still mow their lawns on Saturdays, and women bake pies for the neighbor who's sick. Our house had a white porch swing and a flag that faded each summer under the July sun. I worked 30 years at the plant welding steel in a factory where the heat stuck to your clothes, even in winter. Elaine was the one who kept the center of the home. She embroidered handkerchiefs, baked biscuits that made the kitchen smell of butter, and kept a drawer for every small thing that meant something. She was a woman of order and quiet strength. To lose her was like tearing the spine out of the house. My daughter Karen grew up watching that life, but she was restless. She wanted city lights, not porch swings. She left for Chicago after college chasing a marketing job, and a man who didn't last. When she came back with debt and excuses. I didn't mind helping her here and there, but Elaine always warned me, don't give so much that she forgets how to stand on her own 2 feet. I never forgot that line, though I rarely listened to it. Fathers give even when they know they shouldn't. Now, standing in front of Elaine's coffin, I remembered her words as if they were carved into the wood. My daughter's whisper cut against everything my wife stood for. The pews behind us creaked with cousins, shifting neighbors whispering the organ's faint hum, holding the room together. I kept my back straight. My chest ached not from grief alone, but from the insult that rode in on her question. I reached into the side drawer of the coffin, the one where I had placed Elaine's things that morning. My hand found the embroidered handkerchief she had stitched years ago, white cotton, with tiny blue flowers in the corner. I folded it carefully, pressing the edges between my fingers as if I could trap her warmth in the fabric. Then I turned to Karen and laid it in her palm. She looked down, confused at first, then saw my eyes. I said nothing. My silence roared louder than any rebuke. Karen's face fell. She closed her fingers around that small square of cloth as if it burned. Her lips trembled, and her eyes shined with sudden shame. She whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad," and I could feel the weight of her regret spilling out, but the words did little to patch the wound. Around us, no one noticed the quiet exchange yet. For me, the chapel walls leaned in, pressing tight, sealing the moment into memory. My wife's coffin, my daughter's shame, my silence like thunder. I kept my hands clasped together after that, staring at the wood grain of the casket lid. Every knot, every polished swirl looked like a map of the life Elaine and I had shared. We had known hard winter's nights of counting coins for the heating bill, mornings when I left before sunrise to earn what we needed. But there was love in all of it, love that never once asked me for more than I had. To stand there and have my only daughter reach for money instead of memory was something that gouged deep. When the service ended, people filed past me with murmurs of sympathy. She was a fine woman. She'll be missed. God bless. Each voice was a gentle hand on my shoulder, yet I felt alone, more alone than ever. Karen kept close but said little, her fingers worrying that handkerchief like a guilty prayer. I let her stand there. I had no words left to give her. Outside, the late afternoon sun burned against the black suits and dresses. The hearse weighted its chrome, polished the driver solemn. The air smelled of cut grass and gasoline, mingling with the lilies still clutched by pallbearers. As they lifted Elaine's coffin, I felt my knees wobble, but I refused to bend. A man doesn't collapse when he is being watched. I carried my grief in my chest, heavy and private. Karen touched my arm. "Dad, please." Her voice cracked, not with demand now, but with desperation, as if the handkerchief had opened something inside her. I didn't answer. My silence had already spoken once. It would have to speak again, and in that silence, as the coffin slid into the hearse, I knew the family had changed forever. A line had been drawn at the graveside, and nothing would ever be the same again. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The ride from the chapel to the cemetery felt longer than it should have, though it was only a few miles down the same roads I had driven for decades. The procession of cars moved slow hazard lights, flickering like broken signals against the wide Midwestern sky. I watched the hearse ahead of me, its glass reflecting the sun, carrying what remained of the woman who had held my life together. My daughter sat beside me in the passenger seat, twisting that handkerchief in her fingers until it looked like rope. Neither of us spoke. The silence was thick, broken only by the hum of the engine and the rhythmic clicking of the blinker. As I drove, I thought about the first time I met Elaine. It was at a church picnic by the river, the kind of gathering where potato salad sweats in the heat and kids chase each other barefoot through the grass. She wore a yellow dress and laughed at everything, even when I stumbled over my words. I was a boy from a working family, calluses already forming on my palms, but she made me feel like a man just by looking at me. That laugh of hers stayed with me, carried me through army service, through the years of building a life from scratch, through long winters when the furnace groaned. To lose that laugh was to lose the anchor of my soul. Karen shifted beside me, her face pale against the dark window. I saw her reflection more than her real profile, and in that reflection she looked like a stranger. The girl who once curled up on the living room rug with storybooks was gone. In her place sat a woman with tired eyes and too much distance in her heart. I wondered if Elaine had seen it, too, the creeping selfishness that debt and disappointment carve into a person. My wife always said, love her no matter what, but don't let her forget who she is. I feared that maybe I had let her forget, because I never had the heart to press her the way Elaine did. We reached the cemetery, a hilltop field dotted with stones and shaded by old oaks. Men in dark suits lifted the coffin out with careful steps. The crowd gathered heads bowed against the whisper of wind. I walked close behind, feeling each step sink heavy in the soft ground. Karen walked at my side, still holding that folded square of cotton, her knuckles white from the grip. When we reached the grave, I stood still, the preacher's words washing over me like water that couldn't cleanse. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. The sound of dirt hitting wood rang in my ears. I clenched my fists and tasted iron in my mouth, though no blood was there. My eyes moved over the family gathered. My younger brother's shoulders bent from years on the assembly line. Old neighbors from the block clutching hymnals. Children who didn't fully grasp what it meant to put someone in the ground. But when I looked at Karen, I saw only her shame thickening. She wouldn't look at me. She kept her head down, twisting the handkerchief like it might strangle her if she let go. I wanted to forgive her right there, to put a hand on her shoulder, but the wound was too raw. Instead, I let the moment pass and folded my grief into silence. After the burial, people filtered toward their cars, some leaving casseroles and pies in the back of ours, a tradition that felt both kind and hollow. Karen stayed close, as if tethered to me by guilt. The sky was dimming when I finally pulled away from the cemetery. At the house, the porch light clicked on automatically, casting a warm square of glow against the darkening street. Inside, the air felt empty, as though Elaine's absence had sucked out every familiar rhythm. The kitchen smelled faintly of the cinnamon she used in her coffee. I sat at the table and stared at the chair where she used to read her devotionals each morning. Karen wandered through the house like she didn't belong, touching frames on the wall, running her fingers over trinkets Elaine had arranged. I watched her and felt a twist in my chest. She stopped by the sewing room where Elaine's embroidery hoops still leaned against the wall, half-finished patterns, waiting for hands that would never finish them. Karen's lips parted as though to say something, but no words came. She closed the door instead, shutting in the silence. I poured myself a glass of bourbon, the bottle one of the few indulgences I allowed. The amber glow swirled in the glass, catching the kitchen light. I took a slow sip, letting it burn its way down, dulling the sharpness of the day. Karen sat across from me, finally folding her hands around that handkerchief, as though it was the only thing keeping her steady. She whispered, "Dad, I didn't mean it the way it sounded." Her voice cracked, brittle as dry wood. I looked at her, searching her face for the girl who once held Elaine's hand at Sunday services, swinging her legs under the pew. I couldn't find her. Instead of answering, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet. I opened it slowly, the leather worn soft from years of use. Inside was a photograph I had carried since the day it was taken. Elaine holding baby Karen on the porch, her hair loose, and sunlight spilling across both their faces. I slid the photo across the table toward my daughter. She stared at it, her eyes widening. Tears welled up and spilled before she could stop them. She covered her mouth with the handkerchief, muffling a sob. For a moment, the house felt alive again, filled with her breaking, filled with my silence. And that was when the phone rang sharp and sudden, cutting through the fragile moment. The sound made both of us jump. It kept ringing steady and insistent until I stood and lifted the receiver. A man's voice, low and urgent, asked for me by name. My blood chilled. Whoever he was, he knew too much about my family, more than he should have known. The voice on the other end was steady, almost too calm. "Mr. Harris, this is about your daughter. She owes us, and she's out of time." My hand gripped the receiver so tightly the plastic creaked. I stared across the kitchen at Karen, who was still blotting her eyes with Elaine's handkerchief. She didn't know yet. She was fragile in that moment, but the words pouring into my ear told me she was carrying a secret bigger than shame. I said nothing, just listened, as the man rattled off a figure that sounded impossible. Tens of thousands. Then he added, "If she doesn't pay, we'll come to collect in other ways." My stomach tightened. He hung up before I could form a reply, leaving me with the hum of the deadline and the feeling that the walls had closed in. Karen looked up, her face pale. "Who was it?" she asked. I slid the phone back into its cradle and forced my voice to stay even. "Nobody you need to hear from tonight." But she saw something in my eyes, and her own widened in dread. She knew. She knew the weight of the call without hearing a word of it. I sat down again, the chair legs scraping the linoleum. The bourbon glass was half full, but I pushed it aside. "How much do you owe?" I asked. She didn't answer right away, just twisted the handkerchief tighter. Finally, she whispered, "Too much." Her shoulders sagged, her hair falling forward, hiding her face. "I tried to handle it, Dad. I thought I could fix it before you found out." The words stung. Fix it. That was the kind of lie I had told myself when I was her age, taking side jobs to pay off hospital bills, pretending I could carry burdens without letting Elaine see me bend. But Karen hadn't learned the same kind of work. She had learned to borrow to promise to hope the ground would hold, while it was already giving way. I felt anger building, not the hot, loud kind, but the cold kind that seeps in like frost through the cracks. "You asked me for money at your mother's funeral," I said slowly. "Was it for them?" Her head snapped up, tears shining, and she nodded. My jaw clenched. The insult of it burned deeper now, not just a moment of thoughtless desperation, but a deliberate act of dragging her mother's burial into her debt. The house felt smaller with each breath. The refrigerator hummed, the clock ticked, and beneath those sounds was the roar of my heartbeat. I looked at the photograph on the table, Elaine's smile holding baby Karen in the sunlight. That picture was a lie now. Or maybe it was the truth, and everything after had unraveled into something we could no longer mend. I wanted to shout, but the grief kept my voice low. "You've been using me. Every time you came home with your head down, every time you asked for help, you let me believe you were just unlucky. But you've been sinking, and you didn't even try to grab hold of the rope." She broke then, sobbing into the handkerchief, her body shaking. She reached for me across the table, but I pulled my hands back. I couldn't give her comfort, not yet. Not when the echoes of that man's threat still rang in my ears. The night grew heavy around us. Outside, the cicadas had started their droning song, filling the dark with a sound that never stopped. Karen cried until her shoulders stilled, then whispered, "I'll fix it, Dad. I'll find a way." Her voice was hoarse, stripped of confidence. I shook my head. "You don't even know the size of the hole you've dug. And now you've put me in it, too." She looked at me with something like fear. It wasn't the fear of a daughter afraid of her father's anger. It was the fear of someone who realized she had dragged her last ally into the storm with her. I could see it in her eyes. She wanted to run, but she had nowhere left to go. I stood and walked to the window. The street outside was quiet, a single street lamp casting a pool of yellow on the pavement. I thought I saw a car idling a block away, headlights faint in the distance, but when I blinked it was gone. Maybe it was only my mind twisting shadows into threats. Or maybe they were already watching us. Behind me, Karen's voice was small. "What are we going to do?" I didn't answer. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and closed my eyes. My wife was barely in the ground, and already the world had lined up to strip away what little peace she might have wanted for us. I turned back and saw Karen clutching the photograph, now her fingers smudging the edges. She had set the handkerchief aside, forgotten for the moment. The look on her face was not just guilt, but something darker, a recognition that the past we had shared was not enough to shield her from the present. And in that quiet, broken kitchen, I knew something for certain. This wasn't just about money. Whatever she had gotten herself into, it carried weight heavier than debt. The kind of weight that makes men call your house the night you bury your wife. The kind of weight that doesn't let go once it has hold. Then came the sound outside. Tires crunching slow over gravel, too deliberate, too close. Headlights swept across the window, flooding the kitchen wall with pale light. Karen froze, eyes wide, lips parted. I felt my heart hammer against my ribs. Whoever it was, they weren't here by accident. The headlights cut across the kitchen wall again, brighter this time, like the driver had pulled up and stopped just outside the house. Karen's breath hitched. I didn't move at first. I listened. The hum of the engine floated through the thin summer air, steady and patient, like someone waiting for a door to open. I reached for the drawer beside the sink where I kept an old revolver. It had belonged to my father, a heavy piece of steel that had gathered more dust than use. My fingers closed around the grip, and the weight of it grounded me. I didn't show it to Karen, just kept it low at my side. She whispered, "Dad, please don't," but her voice had no force behind it. She was afraid of more than the gun. A knock came at the door. 3 sharp raps. The kind of knock that expects an answer. I stood still, every muscle taut, while Karen shrank into the corner of the kitchen, clutching the photograph of her mother like a shield. The knock came again, harder this time. "Mr. Harris," a voice called, calm but firm. "We know you're in there." The sound of my name spoken by a stranger on my porch chilled me more than the night air. I thought of Elaine, how she used to insist on keeping the porch light glowing as a welcome to neighbors, never knowing one day it might guide in wolves instead. Before I could decide whether to open the door, I heard a car pull up behind the idling one. Tires on gravel doors slamming. More voices, men talking low but heated. My brother Tom's voice rose above them. He had followed us home from the burial, maybe sensing the tension, maybe just too stubborn to leave me alone in grief. "What's going on here?" he barked. I stepped to the front window and pulled the curtain just enough to see. Tom stood on the walk, square-shouldered in his funeral suit, facing 2 men in dark jackets. The men looked calm. Too calm, the kind of calm that meant they weren't worried about what came next. Tom's fists were balled, his chin out like he was 20 years younger and ready for a fight. I pushed the door open before things could boil over. "Tom," I said, my voice rough. "Let it be." But he ignored me. He jabbed a finger at the men. "You don't belong here. Not tonight, not ever. Get back in your car." One of the men smiled thinly. "We'll go when we get what's owed." His eyes slid past Tom to land on Karen, who had come to the doorway behind me, despite her fear. Her face was pale in the porch light. The man's smile widened just enough to show he knew exactly where the wound lay. The air thickened. Neighbors' curtains twitched. A dog barked down the street, sensing the strain. I felt the revolver heavy in my hand, still hidden by the doorframe. I thought of Elaine again, her voice telling me once, a man who lets strangers push into his home stops being the head of it. She had meant it about discipline, about keeping order. But now those words felt like a warning carried back from the grave. Tom stepped closer to the men, his temper flaring. "You come to a man's house on the day he buries his wife and demand money. You've got no shame." His voice was thick with rage. He always had less patience than me, quicker to throw a punch, quicker to drink himself numb when the world turned sour. His anger was gasoline poured straight onto the fire. Karen's sob broke through the night. She leaned against the doorframe, clutching the photograph tighter. "Stop," she begged, but the men barely glanced at her. One of them pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and let it drop at Tom's feet. "She signed her name," he said evenly. "That makes it ours now. You want to blame someone, blame her." The paper fluttered against the gravel, catching in the breeze. I knew without picking it up that it was a contract, a loan, her signature binding us to these men's shadow. Tom's face darkened as he stared at it. He turned to me. You knew. His voice accused like I had conspired instead of just learned. I shook my head, but the doubt already flickered in his eyes. Grief and anger make men suspicious even of their own blood. Don't start this here, I told him. Not in front of them, but the damage was done. The heaviness in the air pressed down harder. I remembered when Tom and I were boys, standing shoulder to shoulder against schoolyard bullies, our knuckles scraped our pride unbroken. Now here he was doubting me in front of strangers who wanted nothing more than to see us divided. Karen sank to the porch steps, tears streaking her face. The photograph slipped from her fingers, landing face up on the wood. Elaine's smile looked up at the night sky, untouched by the mess her daughter and I had fallen into. I bent to pick it up, my hand shaking. When I straightened, one of the men leaned closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. You've got 1 week. Then, as quick as they came, they turned back to their car. Engines roared to life, headlights swept across the yard, and they were gone, leaving silence behind that felt louder than their threats. Tom glared at me in the porch light. 1 week. What the hell is going on, brother? His voice cracked between anger and fear. I looked at Karen, who sat hollow-eyed, her shoulders trembling. She couldn't even lift her head, and as the weight of it all pressed down on me, I realized with cold certainty my wife wasn't even cold in the ground, and already her house had become a battlefield. That was when Karen lifted her face, her lips moving, whispering something I barely caught. It's not just money, she said. Her eyes met mine, wide with terror. Dad, they want something else. Her words hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. Not just money. My stomach turned cold. I stared at her, waiting for her to explain, but she only buried her face in her hands, rocking as though the weight of it might crush her. Tom swore under his breath, pacing the porch like a caged animal. The night around us was too quiet, the crickets muted, as though even the earth had stopped to hear what came next. I knelt beside Karen, my knees stiff against the wooden boards. What do they want? My voice was low, but inside I was breaking. She shook her head at first, but then she whispered through trembling lips I used Mom's name. The words hit harder than any blow. For a moment, I didn't understand. Then the meaning cut through. She had forged her mother's name on something. Maybe on that contract, maybe on more than one. Elaine's name, the name that had stood for everything honest in this family, dragged into her daughter's desperate schemes. I staggered back to my feet, my chest tight, my vision blurring. The revolver weighed heavy in my hand, though I no longer remembered holding it. I set it down on the porch rail before my hands betrayed me. Tom caught the gesture, his eyes flashing. "God damn it, Karen," he barked. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" She flinched at his voice, curling smaller. But I couldn't defend her. Not this time. Not when she had desecrated more than just her own future. She had taken the one thing I thought untouchable. Elaine's name. Elaine's memory. I turned and walked back inside the house, pressing around me like a tomb. In the kitchen, I dropped into Elaine's chair. Her cushion still held the faint shape of her. I could almost hear the soft scrape of her spoon against her coffee cup, her quiet hum as she read scripture in the morning light. I pressed my face into my palms and let the tears come hot and unrelenting. My wife gone, my daughter lost, and me caught in between a man too weak to hold the pieces together. Tom came in after a while, slamming the screen door behind him. He leaned on the counter, his eyes hard. "You've been coddling her too long," he said. "Elaine warned you, didn't she? Always said don't give the girl too much rope." His words were sharp, meant to cut. I wanted to lash back, but deep down I knew he was right. Elaine had seen it coming. I hadn't wanted to believe it. I thought back to a night years ago when Karen was 13. She had broken a neighbor's window with a baseball, and Elaine wanted her to work it off cleaning the neighbor's yard. I had slipped the man $20 instead, told Karen not to worry. She had hugged me, tight relief shining in her eyes. That moment had felt like love, like protection. Now it felt like the first brick in a crooked wall we had built together. Karen entered the kitchen slowly, clutching that handkerchief again, like a child with a rag doll. Her face was streaked, her eyes hollow. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I thought if I used her name they'd trust me. I thought I could buy time." I looked at her and saw not the grown woman, but the little girl who used to braid flowers into Elaine's hair on summer evenings, who once stood on my boots while I danced her around the living room. The love was still there, buried under the wreckage, but so was the betrayal, raw and unhealed. Tom's fists clenched. "Trust, you dragged your mother's grave into your mess. There's no trust left." His anger boiled, filling the room, until I thought the walls would split. Karen sobbed, falling into the chair across from me. "I'm sorry," she cried, rocking back and forth. I'm sorry." Her voice cracked, desperate and broken. I wanted to reach for her, but my body wouldn't move. My heart felt torn between grief for Elaine and grief for the daughter who sat shattered in front of me. I whispered under my breath, not sure if anyone could hear. "Elaine, what would you have me do?" The clock ticked on the wall, steady and cruel. Tom shook his head. "Sorry won't stop those men. Sorry won't save this house. You've dragged us all into it." His voice dropped rough as gravel. "If they come back, it won't just be threats." I stared at the table, at the photograph lying between us. Elaine's smile, Karen's tiny hands clutching her shoulder. My vision blurred again, but I blinked hard, forcing myself to see it clearly. That photo was a line between past and present, a reminder of what we had been before this fracture. Then from outside, the sound of footsteps on gravel again. Slow, measured, closer. My chest seized. Tom moved towards the door, his jaw set. Karen froze her eyes wide with dread. The porch creaked under the weight of someone standing just beyond the screen. Then a voice, quiet and deliberate, slipped through the wood. "Mr. Harris. We'll take the house instead." The words struck like a hammer. Take the house. That was the last place Elaine had touched, the last ground where her scent lingered in the curtains, her fingerprints hidden in the grooves of every drawer. To think of strangers stripping it away was more than I could bear. For a moment, I sat frozen, listening to the silence after the voice faded the night, pressing in my family's ruin, spelled out in one simple demand. Tom stormed towards the door, ready to explode, but I caught his arm. My grip was firm, steadier than I expected after the shock. "Not now," I said. He glared at me, fire in his eyes, but I didn't let go until he finally stilled. I knew anger would only fuel their power. These men thrived on panic, on weakness. If I let rage steer me, they would win before a fight even began. Karen trembled in her chair, her knuckles pressed white against Elaine's handkerchief. She whispered, "We can't lose the house, Dad. We can't." Her voice cracked, but beneath the fear was something else, a flicker of recognition that this was bigger than money. It was about everything Elaine had built and guarded. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan turning slow above me, each rotation, like the ticking of a clock counting down the week we had been given. Memories surged. Elaine sanding the porch rails while I painted the steps. Her laughter in the kitchen when the radio crackled old country tunes. Karen learning to ride her bike down the driveway, wobbling until Elaine's steady hands guided her straight. Every memory bound to the bones of this house. Losing it would mean losing her all over again. As dawn seeped through the curtains, a strange calm filled me. The tears had dried, the grief hollowed into something sharper. Resolve. I rose from bed and walked the halls, touching the frames, the walls, the grooves worn into the stair banister. This wasn't just a house, it was a testament, and I would not hand it over. Tom sat at the kitchen table, bleary-eyed, a mug of coffee cooling in his hand. He looked at me with suspicion, maybe waiting for me to crumble again. Instead, I poured myself a cup and said, "We fight differently now." He raised an eyebrow. Fight how I leaned against the counter, steadying my voice. Not with fists, not with shouts, with proof, with strategy. If they want to play in the dark, then I'll drag them into the light. Karen came in then, her face swollen from a night of crying. She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. "I need every paper, every contract, every scrap you signed. Bring them to me." She hesitated, shame flickering across her face. But when she saw I wasn't asking, she nodded. An hour later, she placed a stack of crumpled papers on the table, each one heavier than lead. I sifted through them, my hands steady, my mind sharper than it had been in days. I found her signature shaky and desperate, and on one sheet, Elaine's name written in Karen's hand. The sight twisted my stomach, but I kept going. Dates, amounts, clauses, words meant to trap the desperate. Yet buried in the mess were mistakes, contradictions, lines that didn't match signatures that looked copied. I saw it with the eyes of a man who had signed contracts at the plant for decades, who knew the rhythm of ink laid down honestly versus forged by greed. "Did they threaten you into these?" I asked Karen. She nodded, her lips trembling. "They said if I didn't sign, they'd come after me. I thought, if it looked like Mom signed, they'd give me more time." Her voice broke again. I inhaled, slow, pressing down the anger. "Then we have them." Tom frowned, not understanding. I tapped one of the papers. "This isn't just immoral, it's illegal. If they try to take the house, I'll take this stack to the sheriff, to the papers, to anyone who will listen." The words tasted like steel. For the first time since Elaine's funeral, I felt taller. Not whole, not healed, but rising. The grief had not left me, but it had hardened into something useful. A shield. A blade. Tom leaned back, his expression softening into reluctant respect. "So you're finally going to stand," he muttered. I met his eyes. I should have stood a long time ago. The hours that followed were heavy with work. I organized the papers, marked the flaws, wrote notes in the margins. Karen hovered, ashamed, but watching as though seeing a side of me she had forgotten. Each page I sorted felt like a brick in a new foundation, not of wood and nails, but of resolve. By evening I had a plan. I would not wait for them to return to the porch. I would meet them first, armed not with the revolver, but with truth sharpened into a weapon. They expected an old man too broken by loss to resist. They would find someone different. The house grew quiet as night fell. Tom left reluctantly, promising to come back if I called. Karen sat across from me at the kitchen table, silent, her eyes red. For the first time, she reached for my hand without asking for anything. Her grip was small, trembling, but real. I held it for a moment, remembering how Elaine once guided both our hands in grace before meals. The silence was thick, but not empty. It was the silence before a storm, before a reckoning. I felt it in my bones. Then, just as the clock struck 10, the phone rang again. I lifted the receiver, my voice steady this time. "We know you've been looking at the papers," the man said, his tone darker than before. "If you take them anywhere, the house won't be the first thing we take." I hung up the phone without answering. Their threat was meant to shake me, but it only confirmed what I already knew. They were afraid of light. Men who operate in shadows panic when the truth steps close. My chest burned with a new kind of fire, not grief alone, but defiance. I would not let Elaine's house be stolen, not by intimidation, not by forged paper. The next morning I dressed in my best shirt, the one Elaine used to iron crisp for church. I tucked the stack of contracts under my arm, slipped the photograph of Elaine and Karen into my pocket, and drove into town. Karen wanted to come, but I told her no. She needed to face her mistakes, but this battle required my voice, steady and alone. The courthouse loomed tall and gray against the blue sky. I walked inside, my boots echoing on the marble floor. The sheriff's office was just off the main hall. Sheriff Daniels was an old hunting buddy, a man I'd known for years, though we hadn't spoken much since retirement. He looked up from his desk when I entered, his brows lifting. "Henry," he said, "I'm sorry about Elaine. What brings you here so soon after?" I set the stack of papers on his desk. "This." My voice was flat. He thumbed through the sheets, his eyes narrowing as he saw the signatures. He leaned back in his chair, whistling low. "These are bad, Henry. Real bad. Your daughter's caught up with the worst kind of folks." "I know," I said, "but I want them out in the open. No more knocks at night, no more threats on my porch." He studied me, maybe expecting hesitation, maybe expecting me to crumble like a grieving widower too weak to fight. But I didn't blink. Finally, he nodded. "Leave them with me. I'll start a file." And Henry, don't confront them alone. I left the courthouse lighter, but the real test came quicker than I expected. By the time I pulled into the driveway, a black sedan was already parked out front. Two of the men stood by the porch, smoking, their eyes cold as glass. Karen was inside, peeking from behind the curtain. Tom's truck was in the drive, too, his broad frame planted on the porch steps like a guard dog. One of the men flicked his cigarette and stepped forward. "You went to the law," he said, his voice tight with anger that he tried to mask. That was a mistake. I held their gaze and walked up the path, each step steady. "The mistake," I said, "was thinking you could use my wife's name to chain my daughter. The sheriff has every paper now. You can't bury this in the dark." For the first time, I saw it, the flicker of panic in the man's eyes. It was quick, but real. They weren't untouchable. They knew exposure meant more than lost money. It meant prison. Tom stood, his fists clenched, ready for the fight he'd been aching for since the burial. Karen opened the door behind him, her face pale, but her eyes wider than I'd seen in years. She was watching me, not with shame this time, but with something close to awe. The man sneered, trying to recover his control. "You think the sheriff scares us? We've dealt with worse." "Maybe," I said. "But you've never dealt with Elaine's husband." The words came out strong, surprising even me. For a moment, the air shifted. I wasn't just an old man in grief. I was the keeper of a legacy, the defender of the home Elaine had built. The second man stepped closer, his hand brushing his jacket pocket. Tom tensed, ready to lunge, but before it could break into violence, headlights swept across the yard. Another car pulled in Sheriff Daniels himself, stepping out with 2 deputies. The men on my porch stiffened their confidence, slipping further. Daniels called out, his voice hard. "We've got questions for you boys. You're coming with us." The men froze. One muttered a curse, the other glanced at me with hatred sharp enough to cut. But beneath it, I saw fear. Real fear. They hadn't expected the old widower to strike first. The deputies moved in, hands on holsters, but as they closed the distance, one of the men bolted. He sprinted across the yard toward the back fence. Daniel shouted the deputies chasing Tom, running too, his heavy steps shaking the ground. The second man was grabbed, forced to the ground, but the one who fled vanished into the tree line beyond the yard. The scene exploded in shouts, the crackle of radios, the rush of boots. Karen stood frozen in the doorway, tears streaking down her face, whispering prayers I could barely hear. My heart pounded, but through the chaos I felt an odd calm. I had pushed the first domino. There was no turning back. As the deputies cuffed the man they caught and hauled him toward the car, Sheriff Daniels came to me, his face grave. "Henry, the one that ran, he's dangerous. And if he's tied this deep, he won't just disappear." I nodded, feeling the truth of it. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. And then as I turned back to the porch, I saw Karen clutching the handkerchief again, but her other hand was empty. The photograph that had never left the table was gone. She looked at me, guilt flashing across her face, and whispered, "Dad." I gave it to them. The words felt like a blow. She had given them the photograph. Not money, not paper, something deeper, something sacred. The one image I had carried through decades, through sweat-soaked factory nights and quiet Sunday mornings. Elaine's smile, Karen's small hands. That single square of memory. I stared at my daughter, the porch light catching the streaks of tears on her face. And for a moment, I couldn't speak. Why the words slipped out ragged, thinner than I intended. Her lips quivered. He said it was just collateral. Just something until I could pay them back. I didn't know they'd use it. I didn't know it mattered so much. Her hands twisted in the handkerchief, her body shrinking as though she wanted to fold herself into nothing. Tom swore under his breath, pacing again. "Collateral. You gave them your mother's face. You think that means nothing. That's worse than the money." The deputies shoved the captured man into the sheriff's cruiser, the slam of the door punctuating the moment. Sheriff Daniels returned his eyes, moving between me and Karen. He must have felt the shift in the air, the kind of heaviness that wasn't just about crime, but about family breaking under its own weight. I stepped down from the porch, closer to Karen. My voice was low, not angry, but heavy as stone. "That picture was the last thing your mother left me. You didn't pawn paper. You pawned her memory." Her eyes filled again, brimming, spilling over. "I was desperate, Dad. They said if I didn't hand them something, they'd hurt me. I thought it was safer than giving them more of your money. I didn't mean—" "You never mean," Tom snapped, cutting across her words. "You never mean, but look where we are. Elaine in the ground. Henry ready to lose his home, me standing here cleaning up what you started. When do you ever mean—" Karen flinched like his words were lashes. I raised a hand to silence him, not because he was wrong, but because every blow he struck only pushed her further into the pit. She looked at me, not at him, as though the only judgment that mattered was mine. I remembered Elaine's voice, soft but firm, years ago when Karen was still in school. "One day she'll test you," she said, folding laundry in the living room. "She'll cross a line so deep it cuts. You'll want to push her away, but that's the time she'll need you most." At the time, I had laughed it off, thinking Elaine worried too much. Now her words wrapped around me like chains. The sheriff spoke, then breaking the memory. Henry will track down the one who ran. He's the thread that ties this whole mess. But it won't be quick, and it won't be clean. His eyes slid to Karen. And if he's carrying something personal, he'll use it. They always do. The thought of that photograph in his hands sickened me. I imagined him looking at it, Elaine's smile caught in the crosshairs of his schemes. A picture meant for love turned into a weapon. My fists clenched, but anger alone wasn't enough anymore. I needed to end this. Karen's voice came cracked and small. What if I face him? What if I give him what he wants so he leaves you alone? No, I said sharply. That's not how this works. You don't feed wolves hoping they'll stop biting. You starve them until they're gone. For the first time, she lifted her chin, some of the old spark in her eyes. But it's my fault. I should be the one to fix it. I stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. It is your fault. But you're not fixing it by kneeling. You'll fix it by standing with me. My voice cracked on the last word, heavy with the weight of years I hadn't carried right. She blinked at me, and for a flicker of a second I saw her as a little girl again, clutching my hand on the first day of school, needing me to walk her through the doors. The sheriff's radio crackled static and hurried words. He answered, his jaw tightening. Then he looked at me. They found the car, abandoned on the county road. Whoever ran is still out there. Tom cursed. He's circling us, Henry. He's not done. The night pressed heavy again. Neighbors' lights went dark one by one, leaving our house in a pool of isolation. Karen stood straighter now, still trembling, but no longer collapsed. Tom's rage simmered restless for release. And me, I felt something settle deep inside, a clarity I hadn't had since Elaine's last breath. We end it tonight, I said. The sheriff studied me, then nodded slowly. You sure? Yes, I answered. Because if we don't, he'll keep coming until there's nothing left to take. The decision burned in my chest. Elaine's picture had been stolen, but I would not let her house or her family fall. Whatever came next, I would meet it head on. Then, from the darkness beyond the fence, a voice rose clear and mocking, carried on the night air. Henry, I've got your wife smiling at me right now. His words cut through the dark like a knife, and for a heartbeat, the old grief threatened to pull me under again. Elaine's face turned into a taunt by a man who knew nothing of her felt like desecration. But instead of rage boiling over, a deeper stillness came. I looked at Karen, her eyes wide, her hands gripping the handkerchief so tightly I thought the seams might tear. Tom's fists twitched, aching to charge into the dark. The sheriff waited steady but cautious. And me, I breathed. Long, slow, deliberate. It was then I understood. These men thought they could strip me of dignity piece by piece until I was nothing but a shell they could shove aside. They mistook my silence for weakness, my grief for surrender. But silence can be the loudest refusal, and grief can be the iron that hardens a man's resolve. I stepped off the porch into the yard, the grass cool beneath my shoes, the night air heavy with the scent of earth. My voice carried steady. You can hold her picture, but you don't know her. You don't know the life we built in that house. You don't know what it means to earn respect by sweating through your shirt every day and still showing up the next morning. You don't know what it means to forgive someone you love even when they tear your heart in half. You don't know justice because justice doesn't hide behind threats. Justice stands in the open. The night answered with silence. The man didn't laugh. This time didn't sneer. He stayed hidden, and that told me more than words. His power cracked the moment he was named for what he was empty. I turned back to Karen. She stood trembling, but her chin was higher than before. For so long I had shielded her, carrying her mistakes, as if love meant taking every blow on myself. I saw now that love wasn't just protection. Love was also the hard truth spoken when it cut the deepest. "You gave away what you didn't own," I said. "But you're still my daughter. And being my daughter means carrying the weight of what you've done and standing tall under it. That's respect for yourself and for the family that bore you." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she nodded, and in that small motion, I saw the first glimmer of a woman becoming stronger. Not because she was spared, but because she was finally forced to stand. Tom muttered restless, but I caught his eye. "You've carried your share of anger for both of us," I told him, "but anger only builds more graves. We're not digging any more tonight." He grumbled, but he heard me, and his shoulders dropped just enough for me to know he was letting go, even if just a little. I thought of Elaine then, not as a ghost, not as a wound, but as the voice that shaped me. She had always believed that a man's true weight was measured not in what he carried, but in how he carried it. I had carried grief poorly, carried Karen's failings poorly. But here in the night, with threats at the edge of my yard, I felt her presence steadying me, reminding me that forgiveness and justice aren't opposites. They are two hands that steady the same weight. The sheriff and his deputies fanned out with flashlights, their beams sweeping the dark. No answer came back from the voice beyond the fence. The man had fled, his words collapsing under their own emptiness. The yard settled into silence once more, broken only by the chirp of crickets. Inside the house smelled faintly of cinnamon again, as if Elaine had left a trace for me to find when I most needed it. I sat at the kitchen table with Karen across from me. She held the handkerchief in her lap, smoothing it with careful fingers. Her eyes were swollen, but her gaze was steady now. "Dad," she whispered, "do you think she'd forgive me?" I looked at her, the daughter who had betrayed, who had broken, who had brought wolves to our door. And yet she was still my child. My answer came slow but firm. Elaine believed forgiveness wasn't earned. It was given. But respect, you'll have to earn that back every day. She nodded, and for the first time in years, I believed she might. I leaned back, the wood of the chair creaking under me. Outside the porch, light still glowed, holding back the dark. I thought of all the men I had worked beside, bent and scarred, but unbroken. I thought of Elaine's steady hands, Tom's stubborn loyalty, Karen's fragile hope. Life tears at us, tests us, strips us down to see what remains. And what remains is what defines us. For me, what remained was, this family isn't about never failing. It's about facing the wreckage together. Learning that respect is built in the silence after anger, that forgiveness is the hardest labor a man can undertake, and that justice is not vengeance, but the stubborn refusal to let wrongs stand unchallenged. The house groaned softly in the summer night, old wood settling. I set my hand on the table, palm flat against the grain. This was my ground, my burden, my gift. Whatever came after, we would face it together. And for the first time since Elaine's funeral, I felt a strange, quiet peace. Thanks for listening to the story. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment to let us know what you think.